without warning. Weather conditions can quickly change. And if you're not prepared, you could be caught off guard when a hurricane hits.
Folks, this is not a drill.
It's a scenario that happened right here in Central Florida nearly 20 years ago.
Despite what you just heard on ABC that Charlie was heading toward the Tampa area, our meteorologist believes it is heading more towards Central Florida, particularly toward the Orlando area.
Channel 9 was the only local station to change course and warn thousands of the danger heading our way.
There you see a clear turn toward the east-northeast.
Now tonight, we're taking a look at what's changed over the years, the improvements that have been made, as well as some new challenges that could impact you and your family as the 2024 hurricane season begins. This is Predicting the Path, a Severe Weather Center 9 Hurricane Special, sponsored by Covenant Roofing and Storm One Claims.
It may be hard to believe, but the 2024 hurricane season is here. While no two seasons are the same, this year is especially unique in many ways. Good evening, I'm Chief Meteorologist Tom Terry. Not only does this year mark 20 years since Hurricane Charlie changed course and moved right through Central Florida, but there are changes happening to our climate as well as to new technology that are impacting the way I and my colleagues track these many tropical systems. That's why over the next hour, we're taking a look back at the lessons learned over the past 2 decades, what we still need to work on, and what you and your family need to know so you are prepared if and when a storm hits. I can't believe it's been 20 years now since Central Florida started feeling the impacts of 3 back-to-back hurricanes in the course of just 6 weeks. Hurricane Charlie happened to be my very first landfalling hurricane here in Central Florida and the first for Metro Orlando since 1960. It all happened on Friday the 13th in August 2004. I should have known something big was going to happen that night. But little did I know, Charlie was just the beginning.
Right now, Hurricane Charlie is charging up the Florida coastline.
Our fears of yesterday are coming true. This is a really serious storm.
100+ miles per hour wind. That is as fast as that Doppler radar will estimate right now. So that's why we think it is certainly much stronger than that, right around the center of the storms. We have never been able to see a hurricane like this before. There you see a clear turn. There's the track in green. You see right through there, taking it up just to the north of Fort Myers.
So the eye of Hurricane Charlie has now come ashore down northwest of Fort Myers and in the Sanibel Island area.
A lot of debris is flying around. We're seeing all kinds of debris, part of that roof, and aluminum, trees, all kinds of damage.
145-mile-an-hour winds have left their mark on southwest Florida. Central Florida is just a few hours from feeling the full force.
We're getting a lot of gusty winds, as you can probably see, rain going sideways at this point.
Just to give you perspective of the wind right now, it is swirling, so there's no direct direction, but I have a wall blocking me to the side here. And when I step out from the wall, this is how strong the wind is. Bear with me here as we do this very cautiously. You can see I can actually lean right into the wind. I'm not holding my body up at all. This is all wind holding all of me up.
We are seeing some impressive wind squalls right now. The wind is blowing upwards of what's got to be 70, 80, 90 miles per hour. Sheets of metal have been ripped off this building.
There are stoplights hanging here and there, power lines down already. The effects from the wind, they've blown the ceiling all apart here. There's insulation hanging everywhere. Obviously, this is a huge mess, and we're seeing things like this all over Central Florida.
Certified meteorologist George Wallenberger joins me now. George, when it came to tracking Hurricane Charlie's path, we came down to some technology challenges. I remember we had to bring in a new radar computer, just have access to the radar that we used a lot that day out of Key West. And that's actually allowing us to make the track for the storm back in 2004. And that is something we don't have to really even think about today, radar sites.
Yeah, and on top of that, hurricane hunters were doing missions to gather data on Charlie, but they weren't able to plug that data into forecast models. And this could have made a difference in the forecast track and why you had to make such a drastic call at the last minute. But a lot has changed since then. And I talked to the Hurricane Center directly about this, and specifically how the cone has changed in the 20 years since Charlie. And to illustrate how it's changed, we have the cone of Charlie Charlie 20 years ago and Idalia just last year, Tom.
Yeah, we just had that previous graphic. 6 months of hurricane season. A lot of things have changed and will over the next 6 months. But you go back to 2004, we'd only had the cone, which is something very common nowadays. We didn't even have it until 2002, so it was a new thing. Only went out 3 days, and the width of this cone is the forecast error. Okay, so that's kind of the wiggle room, if you will, in the track, and you can see it was a pretty fat cone back then, and it's shrunk by about 50%. That's Idalia, a similar track here in the Gulf from 2023.
And another change, you'll notice this hashed area. The forecast cone now goes out 5 days as opposed to just 3.
And they're working on a 7-day, but they haven't released it yet, but it's coming soon, we think.
That's behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But when I spoke with the Hurricane Center, they said the cone now is about 50% narrower than it was 20 years ago, indicating more accuracy and more confidence in where the center of the storm will make landfall up to 5 days out. And that cone also uses 5-year error as opposed to 10-year error, which it did last year. That kind of defines the width, the successes with the past storms that have been forecasted.
Yeah, we're getting better quickly on our forecast modeling, so the track is getting skinnier in a big hurry. And they've also added, here's an example of this, the inland warnings. When you would go to the Hurricane Center website, you would just see the coastal advisories and the storm center. Now they've added all the inland watches and warnings, and it just shows you, George, that even though the storm may be here, you can still have impacts hundreds of miles away.
So this will be a new way to see the cone starting mid-August when they start being issued, highlighting inland impacts, because we don't want you just looking at the cone. That's where we start, and then from there we add the impact graphics, which can change based on where you live.
That's right.
Coming up, we're talking with hurricane hunters and looking at how their missions have advanced in the 20 years since Hurricane Charlie.
It isn't just the technology that's changed since 2004. One thing we know is getting worse with these tropical systems is the storm surge that they can cause. Certified meteorologist Cassandra Crimmy joins us now. Cassie, we had record storm surge 2 years ago with Hurricane Ian, and climate change appears to be making future storms even more destructive.
Yeah, Tom, there's a lot of discussion about how climate change is impacting the tropics and hurricane development. Sea level rise is one of those components. Now, since 1880, the global sea level has risen roughly 8 to 9 inches. That means our baseline for normal surf is on the rise, and we've already started to see the effects with just sunny day flooding. Abnormally high tides are sending coastal inundation even further inland, and as you can expect, this can be compounded when a major storm strikes the coastline. Now, it's important to note that catastrophic storm surge is not simply due to the sea level rise. There are many factors that need to be in place for quote unquote the perfect storm. We're looking at storm intensity, the forward motion of the storm towards the coastline, how far the max winds reach beyond the eye of the storm, the angle of the approach to the coastline, the central pressure, and of course the coastal features, bays, the slope of the surf. And really, to put that into perspective, here's a 2-storm scenario. You have all the first of those impacts the same. This is a Category 4, moving at the same speed, same max radii, but if it approaches the Louisiana coast, where the sea shelf is shallow, you could see a storm surge up to 20 feet. But then you head over to the Miami coastline, where just the sea shelf is much steeper or sharper. The storm surge would look more along the lines of 8 to 9 feet. Now, there have been some major surge forecasting improvements since Charlie.
But we now use a family of storms, run those through the models so that we get a better understanding of what the full storm surge risk may be.
Our forecasting ability will continue to get better as our technology and data collection improves, which is key in forecasting for future storms in a changing climate, a climate where our waters are warmer, our rains are heavier, and our normals are becoming more extreme. And Tom, something we didn't have 20 years ago to help us track the flood risk with these storms is the storm surge watches and warnings now that the Hurricane Center issues.
Yeah, I remember going to hurricane conferences and talking about, you know, what's the next step beyond just having a hurricane scale 1 to 5, because every storm's different. As you showed, every coastline is different, and being able to break out that storm surge is very
right. And just the shift in the advisories, they've done a lot with the slosh model, adding it in really to help us kind of hone down the risks that everybody along the coast will have with each individual storm, because we all know the storms are different. While both Charlie and Ian caused a lot of damage across our community, the 2 storms were very, very different. Charlie was a windstorm, not a flood storm, but we know that water can do much more damage than wind here in Central Florida.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, certified meteorologist Brian Shields joins me now. And Brian, speaking of flooding, when you and I were on the air covering Ian, based on what we knew about the track of the storm and the speed of the storm, we knew we'd end up with a whole bunch of rainfall. And I actually remember waking up in the middle of the night around 3 a.m. or so. There was some banging going on outside, as there was across Central Florida, and turned on the TV, and you were on the air right then as flooding was underway in Lake and Osceola counties.
It's a typical spot, but this is going to be historic flooding even for them. We're going to hit historic flood levels as we get into the Little Wekiva, so near Springs Oaks neighborhood. We're going to hit about 29.7 feet. That'll lead roads to be impassable. And we've been showing you the video coming out of Kissimmee and St. Cloud with neighborhoods that are homes taking on some water and some of those businesses taking on water. Water's always the biggest issue actually with these systems. Obviously, you have the destruction of the wind right where it happens, but the surge, the freshwater flooding, that's where we tend to run into significant problems, and we're seeing that. Oh, goodness. Yeah, right. Tom, I remember that morning very well. It was right around 4 in the morning when we learned rescues were underway in Astor in Lake County. And obviously here in Florida, we are very flat. And when we have so much rain, the water levels in our lakes and rivers rise so very quickly.
Yeah, and it was amazing how fast the water rose and how slowly. It took over a month and a half for the St. Johns to finally recede.
Yeah, now's a good time to think about your own risk, your own flood risk at your home. Update your insurance policy if you can, or if you need new insurance. And now is the time to at least try to get that. Even if you live near a retention pond, those can flood too.
Yeah, especially if they've never flooded before, especially at the end of the hurricane season, we can have a lot of water in our tributaries. Now, we know property insurance can be expensive, especially here in Florida. Coming up, Action 9 walks us through what you need to know to make sure you get the right coverage that doesn't end up costing you in the long run. Plus,
it was a very fast-moving storm.
Channel 9 is taking a look back at the lessons learned over the past 20 years that have helped make Central Florida more prepared for future storms.
It is the worst storm to hit Central Florida in more than 40 years. Hurricane Charlie was a monster. The destruction is everywhere.
Yeah, it was a big one. Welcome back to Predicting the Path, a Severe Weather Center 9 hurricane special. Tonight, we've been talking about the impacts of our crazy hurricane season we had 20 years ago. In 2004, we had 3 back-to-back storms in the span of just 6 weeks. If you were here, you know it was rough. It all started in August with rapidly intensifying Hurricane Charlie. The storm quickly grew in strength to a Category 4, winds of 150 miles per hour, making landfall on Friday the 13th at Punta Gorda, just west of Fort Myers. Charlie then moved right through Central Florida, right over Orlando, causing damage like we've never seen here before, ripping off roofs, snapping trees like twigs, and toppling power poles, leaving thousands in the dark for days and even weeks. Unfortunately, Charlie went through what's called rapid intensification, and this is something we're seeing more and more frequently with these storms. Rapid intensification is when a tropical system strengthens by 35 miles per hour or more over a 24-hour window. And I tracked several of these storms, most recently with Hurricane Ian in September 2022, Michael in 2018, Irma 2017, just to name a few. And it's storms like these that develop incredibly fast. The hurricane hunters are trying to gather more and more data to help us identify rapid intensification before it happens. Certified meteorologist George Waldenberger has spent a lot of time with these guys, the hurricane hunters. George, you've gone through several missions with them inside some of these types of storms.
Yeah, so I went on hurricane hunting missions to both Dorian and Irma, and I was this close, you remember this, Tom, to going on a mission right into Hurricane Nicole, and then remember at the last minute?
Yeah, you were literally walking out the door with your hurricane gear, and we decided to hang on to you because Nicole had strengthened. We need you back here in the studio.
Yeah, but I was able to send a photographer and walk him through that mission. Tom, it's interesting, though, to see how these hurricane hunting missions are changing over the years, and here's a look.
The planes behind me are very critical for a hurricane forecaster like myself to make an accurate forecast.
Since before Charlie and after, hurricane hunters have started their many missions boarding planes like these.
We actually do fly through the storm. We'll descend down to 10,000 feet, fly through the eye wall. As we're going through the storm, we'll release dropsondes.
We crab into the storm, so we have the wind pushing us this way, the plane's moving this way, or flying this way, but really we're moving sideways.
Once inside of a hurricane, this technology samples some of the most important direct measurements that the National Hurricane Center uses.
The data they collect improve the model forecast that we get for track and intensity by 10 to 20%.
But in the 20 years since Charlie, the technology has advanced.
We do have some new technologies. For example, on the NOAA P-3 aircraft, we now have what's called the tail Doppler radar.
It can provide a three-dimensional look at the inside of a hurricane. And now, from the inside of a hurricane, drones have been launched in recent years.
The hope is that one day we'll be able to deploy drones and provide us continuous data. But at the moment, right now, it's mainly in a testing stage to see how that technology would work in an actual storm.
The new data measurements can help create new forecasting products, predicting specific impacts.
One of the most exciting changes in technology since the 2004 storms is the storm surge modeling. It's giving us a lot more granularity to understand where storm surge might occur and how much storm surge, and I think that's going to keep people safer.
From the last 20 years to the next, hurricane hunters will continue to evolve and forecasts will continue to improve. New technology has been huge in recent years, with hurricane hunters deploying drones right into the center of hurricanes and launching sailing drone boats into the waters ahead of hurricanes. Even the sensors that you see here are becoming more sophisticated.
Yeah, really cool stuff. And after a few years of testing all these new methods, hopefully we can soon add this data into our hurricane models as well. That should help.
Yeah, it could be especially helpful with predicting rapidly intensifying hurricanes. They've been a challenge for forecasters, especially in the last few years, because we've had a lot of them.
We've had a bunch, and it's very important to predict the quick strengthening, as it often happens just as a hurricane is approaching landfall, because of course it does. Thankfully, since Charlie, and especially in the most recent years, the National Hurricane Center has shown some improvement upon forecasting the rapid intensification of both Ian and last year's Idalia. Coming up, protecting your home from hurricane damage is important, and so is making sure you have the right insurance. Still ahead, Action 9 breaks down what you should know before you buy. Over the past 20 years, we've certainly had our fair share of these big hurricanes, with several names being retired, including Hurricane Charlie. But it didn't stop there. We had Francis, Jean, Ivan also retired back in 2004. Then Wilma in 2005, followed by, well, a lot of storms, more than 24 others. It's something the National Hurricane Center does for those storms that cause significant damage or loss of life. And we're giving you a look at just some of the destruction that sent these names into retirement. Storms like Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean came one after another in a 6-week span in 2004. Each hurricane making landfall as either a Category 3 or 4 storm with winds well over 100 miles per hour.
That's my roof, and that's where all the water came in.
These storms dumped several inches of rain, crumbled beaches, sent floodwaters from lakes and rivers into streets and homes, and claimed dozens of lives.
Well, I'll never forget this. I just take every day as it comes. The Lord took care of me all this time. He's not going to let me down now.
Hundreds of thousands of people went without power, some for weeks, while blue tarps popped up like weeds on rooftops across the area.
I have lost everything.
Fast forward to 2016, Hurricane Matthew left his mark on the Sunshine State with record storm surge along our East Coast.
You heard everything peeling and, debris flying everywhere.
And the damage to Highway A1A was widespread, showing why mandatory evacuations were necessary.
Unbelievable what nature can do. We're blessed. I feel very blessed by God.
Hurricane Irma caused widespread damage with flooding rain and tornadoes throughout Central Florida.
We heard everything start to blow, and then the power went out.
And most recently, in 2022, Hurricane Ian hit as a powerful Category 4 hurricane. It brought catastrophic storm surge, damaging winds, and historic flooding from southwest Florida up through Central Florida and onto northern parts of the state. Ian was the costliest hurricane in our state's history, causing more than $112 billion in damage. Damaged dozens across Central Florida are still cleaning up today. Certified meteorologist Cassandra Cremy and Brian Shields join me now. The two of you have certainly seen firsthand your fair share of storms that have been retired.
Yeah, this is my 19th hurricane season here at Channel 9, and in that time I've seen dozens of storms that have been retired.
Yeah, and I remember studying meteorology over in Melbourne at Florida Tech in 2004 when Central Florida was hit with those back-to-back storms. And when it comes to storm names that have been retired, there are actually 96 in total. We started this process since back in 1956. Interestingly, the list of hurricanes names is actually predetermined 6 years in advance, kind of a rolling cycle of 6 lists that continue to rotate yearly. The only time we see a change in that list is if a storm name is retired. So this year's hurricane season will run off the same name list as we had back in 2018. So we'll start with Alberto and end with William. But there are some changes. In 2018, 2 names were retired once the season was over. Those storms were Florence and Michael.
And Hurricane Michael, that made landfall near Tyndall Air Force Base in the Panhandle as a Category 5 with maximum sustained winds of 161 miles per hour. Michael brought catastrophic storm surge to the Panhandle and Big Bend areas. One of the hardest hit locations was from Mexico Beach to Indian Pass, where 9 to 14 feet of peak storm surge was recorded. According to the National Hurricane Center, Hurricane Michael killed 59 people in the United States.
So this year, Michael and Florence have been replaced with the names Miriam and Fabio. And in the event that more than 21 named tropical storms occur this year, there's the additional list of storms. We no longer do the Greek alphabet. We now have the alternate list that's been approved by the World Meteorological Organization.
Coming up, our very own Marty Salt and Bob Opsahl will join me to discuss some of the biggest takeaways from covering one of the most destructive storm years in Central Florida.
And it just shot across the state. We couldn't believe how fast this was moving.
Then, if you haven't already, now is the time to prepare. We'll walk you through some of the things you can do right now so that you and your family are hurricane ready.
That we faced a very serious situation. Unfortunately, that serious situation has progressively grown worse. We are going to be the literal bullseye of this storm.
Channel 9 was the first to tell you that Charlie's path changed from Tampa straight into Central Florida.
You can see the rain continues to come down in sheets. We have very strong wind gusts going on right now, strong enough that my photographer and I have been knocked off our feet several times.
It's just pretty amazing what Mother Nature can do in a situation like this.
Thanks for staying with us for Predicting the Path, a Severe Weather Center 9 Hurricane Special. I'm Certified Chief Meteorologist Tom Terry. Now, we've been through a lot here since the season of 2004. Since then, we've seen some busy hurricane seasons. We're expecting this year to be no different. We're coming off of a fundamental change in what's going on in the atmosphere. Last year, this is 2023, we had El Nino, which brought a lot of strong wind shear across the Gulf of Mexico. And because of that, even though we had Idalia, we really did not have a lot of hurricane activity, tropical storm or anything developed right here close to Florida. It was all way out across the open Atlantic. But we did have record warm water. That's why we still had 20 named storms, even though they were all out across the open Atlantic pretty much. Well, guess what? This year, the waters are perhaps even warmer than they were last year. They're still at record levels. And look at how warm these temperatures are already, midsummer form in the mid to upper 80s, including over here in the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, near the Bahamas. It is going to be certainly lots of fuel for hurricanes to develop. But it's not just the water temperature on the surface. It's how deep that warm water extends down into the ocean. And this is something we've seen exacerbated this year versus other years. We have a lot more warm and deep water. So as hurricanes travel over this, they generally will upwell and bring cooler water in from below. The only problem is there isn't any cooler water below. It's very, very deep. So that's why we expect to see a lot of potential for storms to get really big, really fast here across the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. That's why we're doing this special, to make sure that you're ready. And you can see this warm water stretches all the way out across the open Atlantic. The other element coming in this year that we did not have last year is switching back to La Nina. Lots of names here, but La Nina, instead of the wind shear over the Gulf that kept us quiet, relatively speaking, last year near Florida, it's moving back north. That means storms can develop closer to Florida. So that's why we're going to have a lot of really busy hurricane season outlooks, and we're going to be watching every storm very closely. This was from back in April. Colorado State issued their busiest hurricane season forecast ever, 23 named storms. And that would mean we'd have to go to that backup list of hurricane names if we get all of those names going. A very busy season. And with a busy 2024 hurricane season expected, now is the time for you to get prepared, starting with your homes, knowing whether you're in a flood risk, and making sure you get the kids involved in hurricane preparation planning. Certified meteorologist Brian Shields joins me now with more on those important family preps. Brian?
Kids don't know what they don't know.
And when it comes to hurricanes, there is a lot to know. What do we tell our kids when a storm is on the way? Brianna Edwards of Breeze Counseling Corner has some great advice.
If we do get a bad hurricane, we want to be mindful not to overwhelm our kids with too much information.
What they need to know is also an age-based proposition.
Younger children will respond well to playfulness in the process. So creatively making a game of your preparations or using pretend play, while older kids might need or want more facts.
As a storm gets close, there's plenty to do, and your kids can jump in and help out.
Yes, it is helpful to have kids involved. You can walk them through what you're doing to prepare in order to provide reassurance of safety.
So what can we do with them?
Well, you can take kids to the store with you, show them the items that you're collecting and why you're collecting them, and even give them choices and let them pick out what they might want. Pick out supplies. Do you want this color or that color?
This involvement gives them a sense of control.
There's a lot of crazy going on with the weather outside. How can we make your home an oasis for your child?
Creating this oasis goes for kids of all abilities. Marie Cook from Nathaniel's Hope reminds us to have activities on hand for those with special needs too.
Storms can be scary for kids, and I think if you can provide sensory items for them, trying to keep things calm, when a storm comes, we're often not calm. If we can stay calm and we can provide calming activities around them, that could be very helpful.
Having supplies like board games and their favorite treats makes it less scary when the storm hits.
During the storm itself, getting kids involved by creating a safe space in the home can be so powerful.
So family involvement is the key, and don't forget about the pets either. The kids could kind of help out with the family pets to get them ready as well.
Now, you got 3, and over the last 10 years or so, how's your oldest now?
Oh, goodness, 16.
16 already. Well, maybe the last 16 seasons. You've been really good about talking with families and getting those kids involved. It really kind of helps demystify it and takes some of the stress level down for parents and for the kids.
Yeah, that's the idea right there, and that helps everyone.
All right, thanks a lot, Brian. 20 years ago, we only had the Safford-Simpson scale with hurricane wind categories of 1 through 5. Since then, we've broken out storm surge as a separate advisory. Storm surge can bring a much different threat than just the storm wind fields. And one of the other changes they're making this year, the National Hurricane Center will show inland tropical advisories in their online maps, giving more of a complete picture of what the storm threats are like that we use on television. And it's something that we discussed during April's Local News and Meteorology Communication Summit. George Waldenberger and I were able to attend the summit right here in Winter Park. There we met with local emergency managers who talked about how they plan to utilize this data to get out a consistent message and messages during big weather events. We know a hurricane can be a life-changing event. That means dealing with legal issues you may not have considered or even known about. Investigative reporter Christopher Heath spoke to an expert about what you need to do to prepare before the storm hits and after the storm passes.
Of course, hurricanes are more than just the storm itself. There's also the preparation. I'm joined by Jeff Harvey of Community Legal Services. Jeff is also in the National Guard, so you kind of wear both hats. But what we want to talk to you about today is the legal side of this. So what exactly are we thinking about here? What should you be thinking about as far as what are your legal rights?
Yeah, so there's a number of issues that come up after a hurricane that are legal related. In the short term, when you're talking the weeks, you're worried about your basic needs. Do I have a place to stay? Am I being fed, right? But those are complicated by things like, am I getting paid? So hourly wage workers that are no longer working because the business is closed, right? They're not getting paid. There's issues there. There's issues with renters. There's issues with if you have damage and you own a home and being able to get that fixed in a short term versus being able to get that fixed in a long term. There's a ton of different legal issues that happen there. When you get to kind of what they call midterm, around 6 weeks, maybe up to 6 months, you're starting to deal with those recovery types of issues. You've made FEMA claims and now you're starting to see FEMA appeals. You're starting to talk to contractors and dealing with insurance companies and potentially insurance denials. And then, of course, you've always got the issues of income, right? If you don't have enough money to pay your mortgage and pay your deductible, you're running into issues there. And so, making those decisions without legal advice is really complicated.
What kind of things do you see commonly, both before the storm and after the storm, that people run into that they just didn't stop and think about?
I think before storm, people are often very worried about contents of their home. And while those things are important, I've seen storms where the contents are the least of your worries, right? But they don't always think about those legal issues, and they don't always think to get all those pieces and documents and paper together, because it can be complicated and it's difficult. After a storm, I think what we typically see is people that are in a state of struggle. They've just gone through this storm. Maybe they have issues with food, maybe they have issues with income, they're not quite sure what to do, and they just want to recover as quickly as possible. And they don't always go and get the right resources to help them with some of the tough decisions they have to make. The biggest one we will see is typically mortgage or my insurance deductible. And they have all these great programs out there that say, hey, you can skip your mortgage for 3 months. But most people don't understand that at the end of the 3 months, you have to pay the whole thing back together, with interest at once. And so that really isn't a great solution for people that are in those types of scenarios. And so to have a resource that they can reach out to, whether it be community legal services or some other resource, is really necessary. And they should identify those resources before the storm, and then probably touch base with them immediately after.
Be prepared, think about everything that can happen, and just be prepared for the unexpected. Jeff, I appreciate the time, appreciate the insight, because so valuable to people as we get into hurricane season.
Thank you, Chris.
Coming up, Channel 9's Marty Salt and Bob Opsahl are back. They're going to be here as we take a look back on 20 years since Hurricane Charlie.
Channel 9 was the first to tell you that Charlie's path changed from Tampa straight into Central Florida.
Look at that. 100+ miles per hour wind. That is as fast as that Doppler radar will estimate right now. So that's why we think it is certainly much stronger than that, right around the center of the storm. There's the track in green. You see right through there, taking it up just to the north of Fort Myers.
The eye of Hurricane Charlie has now come ashore down northwest of Fort Myers and in the Sanibel Island area.
Wow. A long time ago. As we get you and your family ready for this hurricane season, we're also taking a look back in the Wayback Machine at some of the lessons that we've learned covering one of the most destructive storms to hit Central Florida. Joining me now, Channel 9's very own Marty Salt and Bob Opsahl. I can't believe, first of all, thank you for coming here.
Thanks for being asked.
We haven't changed in 20 years. I don't know how you're doing it, but
such a liar.
Can't believe it's been 20 years since the three of us were in this very room for about 12 hours covering Hurricane Charlie, and what a storm that was.
Oh my gosh, no, I remember it in some ways like it was yesterday. I remember it was a very fast-moving storm. I think it was one of the fastest-moving storms really on record. I can remember you saying it was moving at 26 miles an hour, I believe, as it was coming across the state of Florida. And it seemed like it was in and out in no time, because it hit the southwestern part of Florida, made landfall like early afternoon sometime, and it just shot across the state. We couldn't believe how fast this was moving. And it was out of, like, off Daytona Beach by the time the newscast, by 11:30, which is the time that the newscast normally ends.
Yeah, that worked out real well time-wise. I think it hit Orlando around 9 p.m., something like that. And then suddenly it was gone, and we were able to go home. Well, I was able to go home.
Because he lives so close by.
Yeah, I just live a mile away.
And of course, it was the next day. It wasn't until the next day that we have any concept of the damage that was left behind. I mean, we were just really, everybody was in the dark overnight.
Yeah, good sign that we're all vulnerable, whether it's not just a coastal issue with hurricanes, it's over the interior. Looking back, what are some of your biggest takeaways, Bob, that you can remember from 2004? It's things that you think that perhaps the city of Orlando has learned what to do and what not to do before and after a big hurricane like Charlie.
Wow. Well, probably before they learned to trim some trees here and there, because a lot of trees were down. I remember my drive home that night. There were no lights anywhere. Of course, power was out over the whole city. And the only lights I saw on my drive home were my headlights. That's all I could see. And I had to zigzag around tree limbs and fallen trees and take a whole different route to get to my house, which is just a mile away. And I got home, shut off the car, I couldn't see anything because it was pitch black. So I had to get a flashlight to see if there was any damage. Thank God there wasn't to my house, but there were limbs and everything all over the yard.
Yeah, I just remember driving home, and it was just complete darkness all throughout Central Florida.
Right.
That's one of the things,
And
Marty.
quiet.
It was very quiet, eerily quiet. I think that's one of the things we learned is that we have to be able to sustain ourselves and our family for several days. It used to be 3 days. Now
Right.
it's a week, pretty much.
Beyond, yeah, because I think it was after that, after the '04 hurricanes, that Publix, for instance, put in place generators in every store so that they could be up and running within hours after a storm passed. Because after Charlie, we were without stores, we were without gasoline stations for days. And so that was a lesson learned. And of course, then people who lived through that, I think a lot of people went and got their own generators to have them ready. I think you're one of them.
I
and
still
maybe
have
you
one.
too. Yeah.
Yes.
Have your own generators at home to at least maybe keep the refrigeration on, possibly air conditioning if you had a generator.
I bought a window air conditioner
Yeah.
for my bedroom.
Yeah, because that became a big problem for people. The mildew said it didn't take long for mildew to mold and mildew to grow and develop in people's homes, and that developed, caused another set of problems.
Did you have a sense while we were doing all of this, because I kind of had a sense in the moment when Charlie was coming through of how big this storm was going to be for this area, about how, just incredible this storm was, that it had taken this abrupt turn, and here it is.
Not at the time. I mean, not while we were covering it that night. I mean,
We were in here pretty well isolated.
Right.
Could you even hear it? I don't even remember hearing it above us.
Not much in the studio, really. I mean, you have all these walls around you. I could tell something was going on. I can tell if we have a thunderstorm in the afternoon because you can hear the thunder.
Yeah.
But there's not much thunder really in a hurricane. But I could tell something. But really, it was over the ensuing days where we were able to get the helicopter up, and you were able to just see all of the destruction and the amount, as you said, the number of trees that were down.
And the blue tarps that sprung up so many weeds throughout Central Florida.
If you got up in the air at all, it was amazing how many blue tarps there were on the tops of houses everywhere.
So this storm essentially, and of course the two that followed it, because if you weren't here 20 years ago, we had one hurricane which pretty much took the power out and the trees, and we were trying to recover from that. And then we followed it up with 2 more hurricanes in the next 6 weeks. So it's like 3 weeks and like another 3 weeks. So this was such a pivotal storm and storms for the station and for all the great people that work here. I think that's one of my greatest memories, is obviously going through the storm personally, but having the great team around us. What a time that was.
Well, it was, and I can remember also, we kind of talked about this the other day too, I remember us having stories on neighborhoods coming together in a way that they had not come together. People suddenly introduced themselves to other people down the street.
And started helping each other.
Because they had to. And people had food maybe that was going to go bad in a freezer, and so they just had massive cookouts, invite everybody over to eat that. They contributed, people maybe needed tarps up on the roof, some kind of help. But anyway, it introduced neighbors to each other in a way that had not happened before.
Yeah. And that year, we didn't have social media or anything like that, so the information people were able to get had to come from the TV or the radio. And I remember some of the tools we used back then we thought were pretty high tech. But then I found out that the tool you used to determine the path of Charlie was a yardstick. And I thought, well, okay, that's pretty high tech.
I still have that yardstick.
Do you?
That was an amazing thing.
Yeah.
The storm had started turning when I got here early in the morning, just before like 10:30. And what I needed was a straight edge to try to, here it is, I needed a straight edge. So I had pens and I had pencils and I had chopsticks. I didn't have anything that was long enough to track this. So I took the dowel rod from my coat hanger. And actually the first one I rolled on the counter like a pool stick, and it was crooked. So I knew that was going to skew the results. So I had my second dowel rod, it was straight. It was about, this long, and I put it up on the monitor, and sure enough, there was, I think it was Claremont. And I went, oh no, we're in for it.
Well, that's what turned you into a weather rock star here in Orlando. Was that weekend, that year. But excuse me, in Charlie, you were making a forecast that afternoon of what Charlie was going to do that the National Hurricane Center had not yet come out and said. And our news director at the time trusted your judgment. And you explain. I remember being in here in the studio and you explaining it to him over there and saying, this is what I see. And he trusted you and he said, go with it. And you went on the air with it. And that was a pretty big deal, Tom.
Yeah, and it was, I remember coming in on Saturday, the day after the storm, and of course there's still no power really, but it was a beautiful sunny day, and I remember coming in and someone slapped me on the back walking in and said, did you feel that yesterday? And I said, well, yeah, I think I did. He said, no, that was the reputation of the station on your shoulders. Yeah. I went, oh. No, I didn't feel that
Pretty heavy, but you handled it.
No,
that's
true.
Such a great group we had, and it takes a
did.
team to do this, from all the people who were out in the field, at landfall, and buildings and hotels are blowing up around the Dane Weister down in Punta Gorda.
Oh yeah, and you had a whole army of meteorologists around you in your.
I came in and I had a whole gaggle. There were 9 of us in the weather center on that day.
And you know, and all the people in the building, administrative staff that we have who, you know, keep everything running. Everybody contributed because there was, they had to, for one thing, they had to feed this building full of people for a few days because we were camping out here at the station. But I mean, all those logistical details of life that just kept everything running and humming.
Well, thank you guys for coming in.
You're welcome.
Thank you,
Happy
Tom,
to do this.
for inviting us. Yeah,
this was fun.
Insurance is top of mind for a lot of Floridians as we head into the hurricane season. Next, Action 9 walks us through what you need to know to keep your home protected. Insurance is top of mind for a lot of Floridians as we head into the hurricane season. The market has been in flux, as we know, the past several years, and costs are hitting homeowners hard. Action 9 consumer investigator Jeff Deal has a look at what you need to know now and why dealing with the aftermath of a storm isn't always as easy, even if you have the right insurance.
This used to be a flat floor. If you notice, it's bulging.
Inside, it's a moldy, nasty mess.
Well, there's not much to do. The house is totaled.
Don Fox showed us his home located right on Lake Jessup in Oviedo. It's now been 20 months since Hurricane Ian hit. We showed you back in 2022 when floodwaters surrounded and overtook his home. Even though he received $127,000 from his flood insurance, he's still working through issues with federal funding before tearing it down and rebuilding.
You find out that only what's in the water is covered. The bottom cabinets are covered because they're in the water. The upper cabinets covered with mold are not covered.
Most flood insurance is through the FEMA-managed National Flood Insurance Program. That's separate from your regular homeowner's insurance policy.
If you do not have a flood insurance policy, you do not have flood insurance.
Tom Cotton with Hugh Cotton Insurance in Orlando says now is the time to make sure you have the coverage you think you'll need and to get prepared.
You know, you need to document things before the loss.
He recommends taking your phone and walking through your home, narrating and documenting the things you have. And ask yourself how you'll handle different scenarios should your home take on damage.
They need to know who they're going to call. Their insurance company, a tree guy, a roofer, a water cleanup guy. You need to have that figured out ahead of time.
But even if you have the right insurance, like Don Fox, help doesn't always come quickly. While he's thankful he did get money for the flood damage, he has to rebuild at the current building standards, which will cost more than his insurance covered. And while he's applied for a FEMA grant through the state of Florida, the decision keeps getting pushed back.
I'm just stuck here. I'm just stuck here. I can't do anything.
He's still not able to begin building while he waits on the grant money, leaving his family in limbo as another hurricane season rolls in.
It's the people who has lost their homes. We're sitting here, we're in the most need. We should have been prioritized over everything else.
Even if you don't live in a flood zone like this, you may want to consider optional flood insurance. We see it all the time during storm season. Homes get flooded that have never flooded before. Jeff Deal, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
The state's Office of Insurance Regulation has a rate comparison tool that allows you to get estimated rates from different companies. We put a link to that on our website, WFTV.com. Well, it's been interesting going back and recapping all that's been going on in Central Florida in just the last 20 years. We're expecting another busy hurricane season. So, Brian, get those kids involved.
Yeah, get everyone involved in the whole process. That'll help lower the stress.
Yeah, and George, we're going to get a lot of data from the hurricane hunters, a lot of new missions.
And there may be an additional mission this year, so we'll keep you updated on that.
Yeah, George likes flying on those missions. They're pretty incredible. And storm surge threat. We have new advisories for it, so just heed the advisories.
That's right. Make sure you evacuate the coast when you're asked to do so when these storms approach.
Yeah, well, lots going on. Thank you for joining us on our Severe Weather Center 9 Hurricane Special, predicting the path. If a storm does threaten our area this hurricane season, you can count on the Eyewitness News team to track it all live for you on your TV. We also stream our coverage on the WFTV News and weather apps. You can stay connected by following us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Stay safe.
Thank you for watching Severe Weather Center 9's Hurricane Special, Predicting the Path, sponsored in part by Covenant Roofing and Storm One Claims.